that Trump rescind the appointment. He said, just don't do it. Those are the words of Harry Reid right there on the Senate floor. For more now, let's bring in prominent civil liberties lawyer Alan Dershowitz. He actually gave an interview to the site Breitbart today saying that he doesn't believe, based on the evidence he's seen, that Bannon is an anti-Semite. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Let me ask you about this, because
Sure.
we've been hearing, I've been hearing a bunch of labels flying around since this Bannon appointment was announced, and this obviously has a lot of people on it. White supremacist, white nationalist, one of them is anti-Semite. And you just heard in those remarks there Harry Reid saying, look, there are court filings that say that Stephen Bannon said he doesn't want his kids around Jews, around Jewish kids. You're saying you don't see evidence he's an anti-Semite. What is it that you're seeing?
Well, first of all, a court filing. It was the testimony of his former wife. Of course it's in a court paper, but he disputed it and contradicted it and said it never happened. He just, from what I've heard, wanted to send his kids to a Catholic school, and that was a point of division between him and his former wife. Look, I don't know whether he's an anti-Semite or not. I just don't think you should toss that phrase around casually unless there's overwhelming evidence. There's an enormous difference between three things. One, is he personally an anti-Semite? I've heard no evidence to support that. He has hired Joel Pollack, who worked with him for 4 years, who's an Orthodox Jew, who wears a kippah, who's married to, has a mixed-race marriage. He has been very positive toward Jews and toward Israel. So that's number one. I think the evidence that he's an anti-Semite is just not there. Number two is, has his paper become the actual vehicle for bigotry? And number three is he supported by bigots? Let's turn to number three first. Yes, he is. But to show you an analogy, if Keith Ellison, who's a decent, good person, were to be appointed the head of the Democratic National Committee, Hamas would support it, would cheer and yell, because he has had some association with Farrakhan in the past. He's made some statements about maybe that 9/11 was something.
Should be clear, though, in the case of Keith Ellison you're talking about now, this is Congressman from Minnesota, right, who's trying to lead the DNC.
A good person.
But he also, the Farrakhan stuff you're talking about was he participated in the Million Man March, helped organize that in 95, right. And he said once he found out sort of a full history of Farrakhan's statements, he said he considers an anti-Semite, doesn't want anything to do with it.
Once he decided to run for Congress, of course he knew, everybody knew that Farrakhan was an anti-Semite. You can't listen for 2 minutes without hearing him rail against the Jewish people. I'm making an analogy only on the point of you can't always judge a person by the supporters. What we're seeing in this country is a very dangerous development on both sides. We're seeing the Republicans move alt-right. We're seeing the Democrats move hard left. And I have to tell you, the only thing the hard left and the hard right have in common, they hate Jews. They generally hate Israel. They generally hate America. And I think we as centrist Americans have to be very concerned about this movement right now.
You're not putting Ellison in that category when you say hate Jews. You're not putting Keith Ellison in that.
I'm saying many of his supporters hate Jews. Many of the people who would applaud his nomination. I would say the same thing about Al Sharpton. He's a decent guy. I know him. But he is supported and applauded by many people. Talk about unsafe spaces, as Harry Reid talked about. Harry Reid, who's, I know him very well, and he's a good guy, I like him, should go to college campuses and see how unsafe college campuses are for people on the right, for Christians, for Jews who support Israel. You know, we have to understand this is a phenomenon that applies both to the hard right and the hard left. And we shouldn't apply double standards. But I am not a fan of Bannon. I am not a supporter of Breitbart. I just want to make sure that we don't throw around the term anti-Semite too loosely and that we apply the same standards to both sides.
Is there something more specific and more particular to what's been created at Breitbart? Because the Anti-Defamation League, for instance, came out and they condemned this appointment. And again, it wasn't so much, the statement that they put out wasn't so much saying Bannon's an anti-Semite. It was saying that the site has become a haven for anti-Semites. And you've got David Duke out there, you know, you had Harry Reid just citing that, saying...
But he never published an article.
This is...
The article that was published, for example, that they quote extensively, where he talked about Crystal as a renegade Jew, that was written by David Dershowitz, another Jew who called... Yes, they published it. But I think it's important to look at what they've published. And there are things that they've published which I fundamentally disagree with. But there are things published on the hard left that I fundamentally disagree. So I think, again, three standards. Number one, what do they publish? Number two, is he an anti-Semite? Number three, who are his supporters? And we have to distinguish all of those elements and then condemn only where condemnation is justified.
This is the thing that's tough to measure, and let me ask you about this, though, because I've heard from, you start talking about, you get to a dangerous road here, but when you start talking about comment sections in Twitter, there has been a noticeable uptick, and a lot of reporters have talked about this year, of anti-Semitic commentary in Twitter feeds in terms of responses to reporters, comments directed at reporters, in comment sections on a place like Breitbart.
You know where most of it comes from? Most of the anti-Semitic tweets come from the hard left. I know. I publish about every month an article in the Boston Globe. You should read the comments that follow it. Hard left anti-Semites, anti-Zionists go after me for everything in the world. So yes, Twitter is terrible in the sense that it publishes all of these commentaries, but go and see where they're coming from. They're coming from both sides.
I've heard from more than one reporter who's Jewish who said, I've been reporting for 5 years, for 10 years, for 20 years. I've never received the kind of feedback, the kind of anti-Semitic feedback that I have once I started covering the Trump campaign. Is there something that's been stirred up? Whether, I'm not saying maybe it was by Trump himself, maybe it was by Breitbart. Is there something that's been stirred up that's new here?
No question. What's new is the anti-Semitism from the right has become emboldened, and it's now kind of almost catching up with the anti-Semitism on the hard left, which has been in existence for 20 years now, sometimes disguising itself as anti-Zionism. Take, for example, Black Lives Matter. I love the concept of Black Lives Matter, but they have become an anti-Semitic group by putting in their program that Israel and only Israel is a genocidal apartheid country. That's anti-Semitic. I will have nothing to do with the organization Black Lives Matter while continuing to support their programs and their policies. So I think we have to focus on the extremism of right and left. That doesn't justify Bannon or Breitbart, and I understand, I agree with much of what Harry Reid said, and I think it would be a good thing if the president reconsidered that appointment, but I want to be very careful about calling him an anti-Semite unless there's more evidence. If there is, I will join the chorus, but not without more evidence that I've currently seen.
Okay, Alan Dershowitz, Civil Liberties Lawyer. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.